Hi, I'm Ruth Pierce. I'm the Relationship Maximizer, and we're going through the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And this is our third session. We'll be starting Habit 1, be proactive. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So where do we begin? First of all, I want to say we spent 2 sessions on the introduction, and now we're in to what's called the private victories. And in this, we're going to learn to move, I should say, from dependency on those around us and our circumstances and be more independent, be able to and develop that core of who we are. So we're focusing more on our values and not being influenced by those around us. So that's where we're going with this. And yes, habit 1 is be proactive. And as we talk about this, try to stand apart from yourself, be objective, pretend that you're seeing someone else. And then here's a couple quotes from Stephen Covey that are good. They're deep, so you're going to have to put your thinking caps on as we read them. We are not our feelings. We are not our moods. We're not even our thoughts. The very fact that we can think about these things separate from us separates us from them and from the animal world. Self-awareness enables us to stand apart and examine even the way we see ourselves. Our self-paradigm. Remember, paradigm is how you see something. It affects not only our attitudes and behaviors, but also how we see other people. In fact, until we can take how we see ourselves and how we see others into account, we will be unable to understand how others see and feel about themselves and the world. Unaware, and we've all been there, we will project our intentions on their behavior and call ourselves objective. And then here's something else that I think is really key. What others tell us about ourselves is often disjointed and out of proportion. They are often more projections than reflections, projecting the concerns and character weaknesses of people, giving the input rather than accurately reflecting what we are. Isn't that true? We've had different people in our lives that try to give us feedback, and we know it's not true. And they're just saying what he's saying here, which is so true. They're projecting concerns and character weaknesses of people of themselves, giving the input rather than accurately reflecting what we are. Now, I do want to say that we need to be open to feedback. And we need to consider the source, take it to trusted people. And if it is true, then be willing to change it. But be also aware that not all feedback that you get is accurate. I'm going to switch gears here a minute. And Stephen Covey has some big words for this. But basically what it is, it's the excuses that we have for why we turned out the way we did. And the first one, there's 3 of these. The first one is genetic, something you inherited from your family. The next one is psychic. Your parents and upbringing caused it. And the third one is environmental. The people and the situations that surround you influenced it. So genetic from our parents, and then people and situations that surround you influenced you. And then this is a key part that's in this first part of being proactive. And by the way, we'll finish being proactive in the next session. There's so many good nuggets in each of these that we break it into 2. And it's the concept of between stimulus and response. And if you've read this book before, this is one of the things that probably stayed with you. I know it did me. And he talks about the story of Viktor Frankl. He was in the Nazi prison camps. I'm going to read this. One day, Naked and alone in a small room, he began to become aware of what he later called the last of the human freedoms, the freedom his Nazi captors could not take away. They could control his entire environment. They could do what they wanted with his body, and yes, they were both of them. But Viktor Frankl himself was a self-aware being who could look as an observer at his very involvement. His basic identity was intact. He could decide within himself how all of this was going to affect him. Between what happened to him, the stimulus, and his response to it was his freedom or power to choose his response. And through a series of disciplines, mental, emotional, moral, principally using memory and imagination, he exercised his small freedom until it grew larger and larger, until he had more freedom than his captors. They had more liberty, more options to choose from in their environment, but he had more freedom, more internal power to exercise his options. He became an inspiration to those around him, even to some of the guards. He helped others find meaning in their sufferings and dignity in their prison existence. And this is one of these one-liners that's worth writing down and remembering. Between stimulus and response, man has the freedom to choose. Then I've got a few bullet points here that talk about the difference between us as human beings and animal thinking. There's really 4 of these, and the first one is self-awareness. We can develop self-awareness. And you saw that in the story with Viktor Frankl, and his was an extreme one. But the more we work on this, the more we can become self-aware. In addition to self-awareness, we have imagination, the ability to create in our minds beyond our present reality. And this is just a side note. When you talk about worry is using your imagination to believe something bad's going to happen. So why can't we use our imagination to believe something good's going to happen? So we've got self-awareness, we've got imagination. The next one is a conscience, a deep inner awareness of right and wrong. That's in human beings, we have that. And then the fourth one, independent will, the ability to act based on our self-awareness, free of all other influences. So self-awareness, imagination, conscience, and independent will. Remember, between stimulus and response, man has the freedom to choose. So then he goes in and talks about what proactivity really means, to be proactive. It means more than merely taking initiative. It means that as human beings, we are responsible for our lives. And that's another key part of this one is being responsible, taking responsibility. We are responsible and believe that our behavior is a function of our decisions, not our conditions, not the environment around us. Our behavior is a function of our decisions, not what's happening around us. Our values override our feelings when needed. So values are more important to us than our feelings. We are aware of feelings, and our emotions are like warning lights on the dashboard of a car. They tell you something's happening, but we don't give into those emotions. We say, okay, I'm warned. Now, what value tells me how I want to respond? We have the initiative and the responsibility to make things happen. You have the initiative and the responsibility to make things happen. This is another one of those one-liners that are so good. And this is one I remember from reading this book decades ago. Responsibility can also be written, and this is in quotes, response dash ability. The ability to choose your response. And as we get through here, we're going to be talking more about this, but it's good to put in right here so you understand what we're saying. We do want to respond, but we don't want to do a knee-jerk reaction. And there's a difference. Because if you do a knee-jerk reaction, your emotions are going to take over and override your values. But you do want to respond. Now, sometimes that response is internal, and you don't say anything to the other person, but a lot of times it will be that you communicate out what needs to be communicated. Maybe not in the moment, it may be later. So responding is good. Knee-jerk reactions are not. Highly proactive people recognize responsibility, that they have the responsibility to choose the response. They do not blame circumstances, conditions, or conditioning for their behavior. What do we mean by conditioning? A lot of us have been taught, or like some people say, that things are caught, not taught. And that's very true in your family of origin. It's also true in different organizations. I was a former HR director, and you could tell what the culture of the organization was. And there were certain values that were supposedly passed on. And you've got to decide, as you're being proactive in those environments, you've got to decide which values you want to take on and which ones you don't. Their behavior is a product of their own conscious choice. Remember, that's part of those 4 things that separates us from the animal world, based on values rather than a product of their conditions or based on feelings. So when we're proactive, we're basing on values that we are continuing to determine as we go through life. Proactive people carry their own weather with them. What do we mean by that? They don't take on the weather of the people they're acting with or interacting with. They don't take on their anger. They don't take on their gloominess, their negativity. They bring their own weather with them. And in that way, they help set the thermostat of the room. If our lives are a function of conditioning and conditions, it is because we have, by conscious decision or by default, chosen to empower those things to control us. Ooh. In doing so, we have become reactive to the physical environment around us. That's not being proactive, is it? In fact, the next several one talks a lot about what it means to be reactive versus proactive. Reactive people are also affected by their social environment. When people do not treat them well, they become defensive or protective. Reactive people build their emotional lives around the behavior of others, empowering the weaknesses of other people to control them. Wow. Reactive people are driven by feelings, by circumstances, by conditions, by their environment. Proactive people are driven by values, carefully thought about, selected, and internalized values. Proactive people are driven by values, carefully thought about, selected, and internalized values. Remember, we're developing from the inside out, and that Getting those values in place is part of that. Proactive people are still influenced by external stimuli, whether physical, social, or psychological. But their response to the stimuli, conscious or unconscious, is a value-based choice or response. And the more you get stronger on that inside core, the more it will become unconscious. It is very hard to accept emotionally, especially if we've had years and years of explaining our misery in the name of circumstances or someone else's behavior. But until a person can say deeply and honestly, I am what I am today because of the choices I made yesterday, that person cannot say, I choose otherwise. Let me say part of that again. Until I can say honestly, I am what I am today because of the choices I made yesterday, that person cannot say, I choose otherwise. That's a really good quote. Here's another one-liner for you. It's not what happens to us, but our response to what happens to us that hurts us. You look back in your life, can you see that? Can you see it in yourself? Can you see it in other people? It's not what happens to us, but our response to what happens to us that hurts us. And that's from Stephen Covey. I have another mentor. And yes, I do believe Stephen Covey is one of my mentors because I've got so much from his books. Steve Backlund has a mantra that he says, our response to something is almost always more important than the something. Our response to something is almost always more important than the something. Let me go a little bit of direction on this again. Be proactive is not just for individuals. It's important for businesses, community groups, and organizations of every kind, including families. They do not have to be at the mercy of the environment. It can take the initiative to accomplish the shared values and purposes of the individuals involved. So it's important that every organization, even families, take a proactive approach to life. Their decisions are based on values, not on emotions. And you look at reality. We all have heard of businesses that have gone bankrupt just because they haven't been willing to change and move with the times. So you look at reality and you say, how do we move forward into the future? That's true with families. Things happen in families. There's tragedies in families. And you've got to learn how to deal with them with your values. We've all been hit by that. Some of us more than others. But I can see it's been 20 years ago now, so it's not a sharp pain. It's not an acute pain. When my mother was killed accidentally in a traffic accident, that was one of those times we had to decide as a family. Yes, we felt it. Emotionally, we felt it big time. And yes, we grieved, and it took many years, and some of that pain is still there. But we determined to focus on our values and moved forward. And that's what's important in any organization, with any individual, but especially in a group corporate setting where individuals have to work together to move forward. Okay, I'm switching gears on you. And I want to talk just a little bit about the language that we use with ourselves and how important it is to know what you're saying, what you're telling yourself. We just finished that book, Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. And that's a concept that is so good. And it's one I did not know for many years. I wasn't taught that as a value. It's just been in the last several that I've learned it. And I want to tell you again, or maybe for the first time, if you haven't listened to much what I've said, it's okay to love and value yourself. I give you permission. I had somebody do that for me many, many years ago. And I still look back at that being the trigger event or the start of my personal growth journey. So I give you permission today. It's okay to love and value yourself. But this is some of the negative language that we talk about with ourselves, and it's from a reactive place because reactive means blaming, and proactive means taking responsibility for who you are and the decisions you made. Go back to that quote that we had before. I am what I am today because of the choices I made yesterday. And until I'm ready to be able to really say that word, I cannot say I choose otherwise. And so when we're in that reactive mode, we'll use language that reflects that I'm not taking responsibility. It might be, that's just the way I am. There's nothing I can do about it. He makes me so mad. I'm not responsible. My emotional life is governed by something outside my control. I can't do that. I just don't have the time. Something outside me, limited time, is controlling me. If only my spouse was more patient. Someone else's behavior is limiting my effectiveness. I have to do it. Circumstances or other people are forcing me to do what I do. I'm not free to choose my own action. It's a transfer of responsibility. I'm not responsible. I'm not able to choose my response. We never want to transfer responsibility. You never want to say you have to do anything. Sometimes we feel that. Maybe our boss puts something on us. Maybe our family puts something on us or have expectations. But find a way to be proactive. But never say you have to do something. Now, you may do something because of the consequences if you don't. Like if your boss says you need to do this, you want to look at the consequences and say, yeah, I do. If I want to keep my job, I do need to do this. The same with family. You may feel like you have to do something to keep peace in the family. But make sure it's based on a response, not a knee-jerk reaction. And make sure that it's a value that you really covet, you really want. Never say or think you have to do anything. You always have a choice. And I've got just a few more bullet points that I want to run through with you that have to do with this. These are all deep thinking questions. A serious problem with reactive language is that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. People become reinforced in the paradigm and they produce evidence to support that belief. They feel increasingly victimized and out of control, not in charge of their life or their destiny. They blame outside forces, other people, circumstances, and even the stars for their own situation. So to be proactive, remember we're moving from dependency to independence. We're going to be proactive. We're going to take responsibility, full responsibility. Now, it's a process. You're not going to jump in and everything that's negative and all the reactions, the knee-jerk reactions are going to be gone. But this is a process, the continuum on which you want to work from. You want to be continually moving more to taking ownership, taking responsibility. It's the ability to respond the way you want. And you think of it this way. The stimulus is on one side, and instead of having that be really close, so the response is right away, get a gap in there so that you can take time to say, what are my values and how do I want to respond to this? If it's like this and you feel like you have to respond right away, you're going to be emotional. So to get that gap in there and so that you can respond using your values. Remember, responsibility is the ability to choose your response. And with that, I'll say goodbye.